There we go. Welcome back to the Fierce Freedom Podcast. I'm Kat Morgan.
And I'm Jenny Elmquist.
Yay. So Jenny's going to be joining us today as my co-host. And it's only fitting, Jenny, because you're executive director and you've also met our guest Harmony before. So
yeah, we brought Harmony in a number of years back, and she spoke at the university. We partnered with Peace Church, who has always been so generous with us as an organization. And I believe that you spoke at Peace Church as well. If it wasn't that time, you had spoken another time there. I know, but yeah, just you've been such instrumental part of the movement of anti-trafficking here in the Upper Midwest. And so we're just really grateful to have you on today.
Wow. Welcome to the podcast, Harmony.
Thank you. That's so beautiful, so incredible. And yeah, definitely have had some special memories out there with you guys, and really thankful for the work that you're championing in your community. So thank you.
Absolutely. And so a little bit more about Harmony for our listeners as well. So Harmony is the founder and executive director for Treasures. She is a survivor of exploitation turned UCLA honor student. Well, that's amazing. And Harmony's goal is to help women and girls find freedom from sexual exploitation and trafficking. Armed with personal experience, evidence-based theories, and a master's degree in social work, Harmony comprehensively sheds light on the impact of a pornified culture and the lives of those within it. So her pursuit of justice has led to congressional recognition and opportunities to train the Department of Justice and FBI in best practices. And back in 2003, she founded Treasures. So you guys are going on 20 years next year. That is so exciting. Yeah. And this is to empower other women in the commercial sex industry to live healthy and flourishing lives. So everyone should also check out Harmony's memoir, Scars and Stilettos, which details her harrowing account of moving from a victim to survivor to liberator. So what a amazing story and testimony that you have, Harmony. So yeah, 20 years of founding Treasures. That's so awesome.
Wow. I know, it's crazy. I think back, I was just a baby. I didn't even know what I was getting myself into, you guys, which is probably a really good thing.
Right. You're like, I'm just going to do that next thing. Probably. That's probably how you feel, Jenny, too.
Yeah. But Harmony, you did the really hard work of, you went to school, you worked on your grades, you got a master's degree. It's not like just showing up. Like you really leaned into it, and that's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to be equipped, and that was really important to me to do this well and to do this with excellence. So, here we are. Did the best I could. I've done the best I could.
Yes, that's great. And that's so inspiring, I think, for other, survivors of trafficking to see what you've been able to accomplish. And so before we kind of get to, that, I would love for you to share just a little bit with, listeners, a little bit more of your story and how, we talk a lot about vulnerability and how vulnerability itself is not a bad thing. It's what makes us all human beings. But just being aware of, okay, so a vulnerability could be something like, I have a loved one. So unfortunately, somebody with ill intent is going to look at that and say, that's a way that I can get in, and that's a way that I can coerce somebody towards sexual exploitation. So, and some of those, we could argue too with systems of oppression and things that are set up. Some people are really, it feels like they have a target on their back where their vulnerabilities are going to be taken advantage of just more readily in some cases. But so for you, Harmony, how did those vulnerabilities that you kind of grew up in lead you to a life that led to commercial sexual exploitation?
Yeah, I mean, vulnerability plays a huge role. In fact, we talk a lot about this in our trainings. The way I see it, people become susceptible to exploitation and trafficking as a result of a real combination between vulnerability and environment. And there's the two things happening. Mm-hmm. And so for me in my story, I experienced a lot of the vulnerabilities that are very common to people who find themselves exploited and trafficked. I have a history of sexual abuse, poverty, came from a home where there was domestic violence, lived in a violent neighborhood with gangs. There were just so many divorces. There's so many layers, single mom, all of the things. And those vulnerabilities made me more susceptible. But then there was the interplay of the environment. There was the fact that there were people who were looking to take advantage of my vulnerability and exploit it for their gain, and exploit my sexuality for their gain. And, I mean, the 3-minute elevator version of my story includes a boy in my neighborhood who preyed on my vulnerability and ultimately became my pimp, working in pimp controlled stripping. And, that's the story that, is most known and that I most often tell, but he definitely was not the first person to attempt to exploit me. I mean, growing up in Los Angeles, there were so many cases where people were like, I'm a manager, I'm a talent scout, I'm an agent, I'm a photographer, I want to help you have a modeling career. I mean, I had a situation at 15 where someone convinced me that the way to make it in modeling was to show that I was comfortable with my body and my sexuality, and coerced me into a nude modeling shoot in the middle of the desert at 15 years old. And I still don't know what those photos are, And right before we started filming, we were talking about, how subtle and sneaky it is, and how, often women and girls find themselves like not even realizing what they're stepping into. And I remember at 18 years old, I answered an ad in the newspaper that was like, girls wanted, make up to $500 a week or whatever it was a night, maybe $500 a night, as a hostess. And, I have no idea what a hostess club was. Still to this day, a lot of people I talk to don't even know what they are, but they're essentially, they're brothels that are running under the guise of legal businesses that are offering company and companionship to men where they pay by the minute. And I showed up and I walked in and I said, so there's nothing going on. There's no funny business. How am I going to make $500 a night? No, there's no time. There's no funny business. There's nothing going on, And I was like, this seems too good to be true, but I'm desperate for money. And sure enough, the first person I was with on the floor that was paying by the minute to see me was like, you're never going to make money in this place unless you do something. And then within an hour, I was watching women turn tricks on the dance floor. And so, but that was just answering an advertisement in the newspaper.
Right.
And so the person who ended up becoming my primary exploiter certainly was not the first person to attempt it. He was just the one who found my most key point of vulnerability, which was my desire to be loved and to have a relationship with someone who, would be ride or die, that would be with me. And he would tell me, I've got your back. I'll take care of you. He made me feel safe in my gang-ridden neighborhood. He made me feel provided for when my mother left my brother and I when I was 13, and he bought us food. And so he was just the most successful one, but he certainly wasn't the first.
Wow. I think, it's so good for us to all put ourselves in that mindset of survival at 13 years old. And you have somebody that's taking care of you, like basically a surrogate parent, like a parent should, but somebody that sort of seems that they have the answers. And, why wouldn't you, continue to trust that person? And gradually, it does lead to maybe something that at front, like, at offset, it's not going to be something that you're trying to get into, but I could see how a person that you trust so implicitly saying it's okay, and maybe saying you don't always have to do it, or whatever that looked like for you. I mean, I could see myself completely falling into something like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's surviving. You have to survive for sure.
So then Harmony, what, just if you could briefly share with listeners, so then what did this end up looking like, because I know that you have this really great video out there that shares a little bit about, becoming a stripper. So then can you share a little bit about how that looked for you, but then maybe how you exited, how that looked for you too?
Yeah. I mean, becoming a stripper, my goodness. Having a history of sexual abuse, this is something I talk about a lot, is that that I had never been in a strip club the first night I went there. At the same time, there was something so familiar about the environment, because my history of sexual abuse had, in a sense, groomed me for the commercial sex industry, because it eroded my personal boundaries, my physical boundaries, my sexual boundaries. It left me feeling kind of like frozen and voiceless when it came to, you know, being sexually exploited. It normalized being sexualized and objectified. And, you know, these are job requirements. You have to deal with becoming a sexual object. You're a product, you're not a person. You have to, you know, squelch your own voice and give in to the demands of the demand, because the demand does what it promises. It demands that your answer is yes. It demands that you, you know, bend to their whims and wants and fantasies. And so my history of sexual abuse had really prepared me for that. And I think that's why we see such a high prevalence of sexual abuse among those of us who do find ourselves exploited.
Right.
So it was, in some ways, it was adjusting to this whole other world, but in a lot of ways, it was very familiar because of my history. And the way I got out, it truly was as simple as a friend, someone who reached out to me and loved me unconditionally. And I would do, I think what I've heard is called trickle truth. I would give her little trickles and bits of the truth at a time about my life to see if I could trust her, see what her response was. Because if she couldn't handle a little trickle of the truth, there's no way she was going to handle the full truth. So I trickle truthed her into, you know, eventually opening up to her more and more about the life that I was actually living. And, you know, I never felt judged by her. I never felt like our relationship, you know, she was a person of faith, but I never felt like our relationship was contingent on me going to church, or, you know, it never felt like she was looking down on me, you know, in any type of way. And so it was that friendship and her love, her unconditional love, and experiencing that began to give me access to a different life that I could live. You know, she was someone who had boundaries and self-respect, and who had fully learned to exercise her no muscle, as you call it, you know, like she could say no, and she was confident. And so, you know, the treasures, you know, we've been around for 20 years, and really it just started out so grassroots, and really wanting to come alongside women and provide them the same kind of relationship and unconditional love and support that I received from my friend in the very beginning. And, you know, as we've grown and as I've gained education, I've learned new tools and techniques and theories and paradigms that have helped really hone and shape best practices. But at the end of the day, those foundational things are still the most important. Like, we meet people where they are at, we love them unconditionally, and we walk alongside them and support them on their journey to health and freedom. And it's as simple as that. And yet it's also very hard and complicated, but it's as simple as that.
Yeah. I think doing it well takes so much, you know, to really walk alongside somebody. But at the same time, you're right. Like, that's just modeling that health, like her becoming a person that was able to say no and had things that about her that you saw and that you wanted for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's something I want people to hear, is that it can just be something where you value and respect yourself, and then you show that to another person. That's what we're all about at Fierce Freedom too. We want to always speak worth, dignity, and value into every aspect of what we're teaching and how we're educating. So I mean, that's just evidence right there that works.
Yeah.
100%.
Harmony, I'd be curious to know what your friend, you said that she really gave you access to a different life. And I'm wondering what did that look like? Like,
I mean, this story, it sounds so simple, but it was a huge catalyst for change in my life. So, for example, she showed me a picture of a different life. So one day we had made plans to go get, I think, frozen yogurt, right? And this is before cell phones, or maybe I did have a cell phone, but it was like before you run out of minutes in 5 seconds, whatever. So it was in the landline days. Okay. And she had driven all the way to my house in West LA from the San Fernando Valley, which involves the 405. And if you're from LA, nobody wants to get involved with the 405. So she had gone through a long drive in traffic to come see me. And she shows up at my doorstep. We're getting ready to walk out of the door. and my phone rings. And of course, I know it's my exploiter, and I know I need to answer it. And I know that I need to, report to him what I'm doing, who I'm with, where I'm going. Otherwise, I'm going to get in trouble. And so I pick up the phone, and when he finds out that I'm going to do something to hang out with someone, of course, his tactics, it's all about control and maintaining control over me. So he's keeping me on the phone and really kind of trying to sabotage my attempt at spending time with a girlfriend. And my friend Tanya, I'll never forget, so lovingly, without any attitude or passive aggressive kind of tone, just was like, we can hang out another time. Okay, I'm gonna go. I love you. Bye. And she walked out of my apartment and drove all the way back to the valley. And my takeaway was that she had such a sense of self-respect and boundaries that she wasn't even willing to participate as a bystander in the toxicity of my relationship.
Wow.
And then it made me wonder, why am I willing to participate in the toxicity of this relationship? And again, it was done with such love, with such grace, never guilt trip me. I can't believe I drove all the way in traffic and you didn't, but whatever. That was it. We never even talked about it again. But that was the kind of thing that was just life-changing. And it really just came from time and relationship together.
It's beautiful. I love that.
I just oh my gosh, that's really cool, because it's the simple, but it's not the simple things. It's something where she didn't plan that out. She didn't plan an intervention with you. I mean, I think that it's so, I feel like it is so hard to know how to navigate those kind of situations when you want to be a good friend, but you're seeing that kind of toxicity going on, and you think, do I have to have an intervention? Do I have to cut them off? Because, am I just giving in to what they really want? I don't know. It's so hard to know how to navigate that. But in this situation, I feel like, yeah, her self-respect and her kindness is really what made the difference. She wasn't taking anything away from you, really. It was more just, I respect myself and I'm not going to be part of this. So I don't know. That's profound to me.
There's 25 ways that could have turned out differently.
Right.
100%. And each of the other ways would have possibly been good. You know what I mean? But that's what I needed in that moment.
Yeah.
And I believe God knew that, yeah, I mean, because she could have easily just waited till he was done, whatever, on the phone call, and we could have gone to lunch, and she could have wanted to process it with me. That could have been that wouldn't have been a bad choice either, Right. But I think what I sensed is that her leaving was a reflection of her own self-respect. And I was like, gosh, I want to respect myself that much.
Wow. So you mentioned that, maybe because of her faith, maybe she even had sort of that insight and that knowledge of her own intrinsic worth and value. So how did faith and in your trust in the Lord, play a part in your own story? And then how is that kind of translated into treasures?
Yeah, I mean, hugely. I mean, really, all the first recovery classes I went to were there are Changes That Heal courses on Monday nights, and using Dr. Clouden Townsend's recovery curriculum, which are a curriculum that we use with the women to this day in our support groups, because they are tried and true and fantastic. And just, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what am I going to renew my mind to? I want to renew my mind to the truth. Well, what is the truth? And, my faith in Jesus gave me a framework for truth and what love really is, and who I am and who I was created to be. And so those, it was foundational to my recovery process, 100% for sure. And so with Treasures, it made sense for us to be a faith-based organization. And at the same time, we have a whole module in our training that covers being faith-based, because that can look different depending on what cultural environment, organization you're a part of. And it can look like proselytizing. It can look like, evangelizing and preaching, and all of those things, are beautiful and have a place. And for us, the way we approach it is that we are a faith-based organization, but there are no faith requirements to receive support and services from treasures, because we believe it's important to meet people where they're at. And when we say there are no faith requirements, that doesn't mean just on day one, and we hope that we're going to be able to convert someone on day 10. That really means like we're going to show up and we're going to meet the felt needs of the women that we serve, regardless of what they believe. There's this beautiful thing, that the kind of an illustration that I've seen, where it's like the church, we often expect people to behave, believe, and then they can belong. But we really need to start with belonging. Like, you belong. Whether you behave or believe, you belong. And so that's really our approach. And then we have a weekly Bible study that women are welcome to attend if they want to. But then like our other support groups, our empowerment group and our general support group are, women from all walks of life that are coming alongside and supporting each other. And then if and when faith does become a part of those groups, it's because it's been initiated by the women themselves. And this is also, I think, super important to empower women in their own faith process, especially when we're talking about women who have often been manipulated and controlled. They've lost their internal sense of control, their locus of control, and they've become accustomed to being externally controlled. So if they're coming from an exploitative situation where someone was dictating and controlling every aspect of their life, it actually might even be comfortable and familiar to step into another environment where, with good intentions, people are trying to dictate and control every aspect of their life, but for good, with faith and religion, right? So it's very important that we empower women in their own process and faith and relationship with God.
So good.
I love that.
Yes.
And I'm feeling like what you're doing is you're giving choice. And that can be really scary when you want to choose for them, because you feel like what's maybe better and maybe what's going to help them find healing. And I totally understand that and can relate to that. But I feel what you're giving is so much more powerful, which is choice, because their choices were never allowed before. And so you're going to show that you're different, because you're saying you have the freedom to choose right now.
And I have enough trust in God that I know I don't have to be the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
That my friend gave me is that she didn't try to be the Holy Spirit to me. She trusted the Holy Spirit to be the Holy Spirit. And at the end of the day, that gift of choice is what God gives to each of us. Yes. Like, he loves us so much that he will not assert his will over us. And he invites us into relationship with him, and he invites us to walk with him, but it's our choice every step of the way,
Yeah.
That's so good. I love that. It's an empowering place to be when you realize that you're loved, regardless. And you don't always choose your consequences, but hopefully you learn from that. But that throughout it all, you're loved the same.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, hearing from your experience, because we're in the educational and awareness side of fighting human trafficking and exploitation. And there's a lot of different models of different organizations around us. And I think where we land, specifically Kat and I both, I think, is that we really love your model. We love that people aren't, you don't put them into another setting and have an expectation that maybe they're not ready to step into that. You respect them as a person, and you trust the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
I love that.
So good. So then if you could talk about some of those resources you've created for survivors. You mentioned how you have a Bible study and you have some of those things available specifically, but if you want to share some of your favorites that you have, but then ultimately, what is that goal that you have through those resources?
Yeah, so we have 3 groups that meet a week. Our empowerment group, which is for survivors who are a little further along in their process and wanting to get really equipped and empowered to move into the next phase in their recovery. We have our support group, which is each of them, we try to always encourage and equip, but the support group is a place for more open sharing, maybe people who are a little more recent in their process or have things they're just wanting to process. And then our weekly Bible study, we have a mentoring program. We do just build a lot of community. We do events, Thanksgiving, Christmas, we do baby showers. I mean, we just really try to develop a strong sense of community and support around the women. And we partner a lot with other organizations to, for example, we can't do everything. So we don't do vocational training or occupational therapy, but we partner with an organization that can provide that. We don't do residential, but we partner with organizations that can provide that. So we really try to support each woman in developing a broad network of support around her so that she can get access to all of the resources that she needs. We also we don't like to, speaking to people's dignity and worth, we don't call our food pantry a food pantry. We call it the little market. We have a wardrobe closet. It's glamorous. It has a chandelier and a gorgeous couch. And we don't want our environment to feel like poverty.
Right. Love it.
We want to break those cycles of poverty. So, and in those ways, even with the way we aesthetically, address our environment is to reflect the value of the women that we serve. So, and our ultimate goal is that women would find true and lasting healing and freedom from exploitation and trafficking, and that they would, our tagline is loved, valued, and purposed. And I know from firsthand experience that when we have a revelation, a true revelation of the fact that we are loved and valued and purposed, then it's very difficult to live in a way that contradicts that. When that takes root in your heart,
Yes.
game changer. And then we're not policing behavior, right? Because that's coming from a true place of heart transformation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think they're realizing that, like you said, they're learning their own self-respect. And it's like, is this the kind of life I want to be building? Like, it's not just like, oh, I got a slap on the wrist because I shouldn't be doing it. It's like, they have to live with that consequence if they choose, to do something that doesn't align with their own personal intrinsic value. I love that so much. And I just love how you say, like, the little market, like, even just how you're saying something or how it's presented, it does speak volumes. You don't always, like you're saying it in how you're presenting it too.
Mm-hmm.
So then, Harmony, I want to just hear your thoughts about, obviously you've been out of this life for several years now. And so I'm just curious what you would think about, do you think that there's been an evolution in trafficking and exploitation over that time that you've been out? And if so, how does that look?
Yeah. So definitely the landscape of exploitation and trafficking in some ways has changed. And in other ways, it's just more a matter of our awareness and understanding of it. When I started Treasures almost 20 years ago, the language of trafficking really wasn't, widespread. I didn't even have an understanding really of my own exploitation. I just knew that I wanted to help support women who were in similar situations to what I was, but I didn't have a lot of language to describe what that was, other than I worked in the commercial sex industry. And, I was aware of the fact that my boyfriend had become my pimp, but I didn't have language for what that actually was,
Mm-hmm.
So that has definitely changed. As the movement has grown and there's been more education and awareness around what exploitation and trafficking actually are, how they're happening, their intrinsic connection to the commercial sex industry, people are growing in their awareness of that. But the main way that exploitation and trafficking has changed over the last couple of decades is with the introduction of online forms of exploitation. When I was in the strip clubs, the internet was like barely a thing. And as I was leaving, they had just started installing webcams all around the club and live streaming what was happening in the club. And that became a part of that environment. And then of course, then there's webcamming that developed, and platforms like OnlyFans and these, platforms where online exploitation is being facilitated through Backpage Pro and the previous Backpage and previous Craigslist and all the, lookalikes that have popped up since then, where, for example, most prostitution was happening either through escort agencies or on the tracks, whereas now, traffickers can keep their victims in hotel rooms without them ever really seeing the light of day or even interacting or coming into contact with the general public or law enforcement, and they're just being sold right out of the hotel room with, the facilitation of these online forums. And then also the accessibility and how easy it is now to enter the commercial sex industry because of all these platforms and things. Since the pandemic, there was a huge explosion in online exploitation. We saw, for example, websites like OnlyFans grow exponentially. There was a number of reasons, partly had to do with like them becoming more mainstream through being mentioned, in mainstream media, but also that had to do with people being at home, isolated, bored, lonely, tired, angry, like COVID stress and anxiety trauma, and looking to fill those voids, and then people's job situations changing, being economically vulnerable, needing a way to make money from home. And so we saw a lot of people who maybe otherwise wouldn't have ended up in the commercial sex industry enter in through platforms like OnlyFans. We, since the pandemic began, are serving 3 times the women that we were before.
Wow.
And a lot of it has to do with that online explosion. We constantly get messages from people who are like, wow, I didn't know what I was getting into. I started an OnlyFans and now I feel trapped. I feel stuck. I don't know how to get out. I didn't realize how this was going to affect my life. So it's definitely changed the landscape.
I'm so glad that you brought up like OnlyFans, and something else we talk about is like sugar baby, being a sugar baby. And I know that that's exploded in the last couple of years as well. And I think what you touched on is that there's this idea that I can control it. I'm behind a screen. I'll be safe. I know what I'm getting into. And what you just shared is that often these creators that are joining OnlyFans and thinking that they're proved wrong, and they end up with, people that it can lead to stalking and doxing, which is like publishing information, and revenge porn and all sorts of things that I think aren't necessarily on your mind when you're just thinking, oh, this is a quick and easy way to make money. And that's how it's marketed, on the offset, that's how it's marketed.
Yeah, I did a whole, when I saw, for a while I was being told about how OnlyFans was exploding, but it was this tension of like, I don't want to mention OnlyFans because I don't want to give it more platform. So I knew it was happening behind the scenes, but when it got to the point where it was so publicly known that I needed to speak to it, we released a video on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, called What You Need to Know About OnlyFans. And the whole purpose of the video was to help people make really informed decisions about what they're stepping into, because so many people are very unknowingly stepping into the OnlyFans kind of arena and not knowing, like, you're still going to be, even if you don't have a pimp or an exploiter, you're going to have to like listen to the demand of the demand every single day in your messages, like telling you what they want you to do. And, then it's one thing to start an OnlyFans page. It's another thing to keep it up and keep making money on it, which means just like other areas of the commercial sex industry, you end up having to do more and more for less money, because it's such a saturated market and there's always someone else who's willing to do more for less money. The sexual harassment that people have to deal with, like you said, the doxing, the stalking, all of those things. So anyways, that video is available on YouTube. It's on our YouTube channel. I believe it's Treasures LA, at Treasures LA, or /Treasures LA, or however that works.
Right. I know it's so pervasive. We were talking about this even before recording, and it's almost like every day you kind of find out about a different way exploitation is leaking into everyday life. Exodus Cry just released a video talking about the like basically sexy coffee baristas who are in Seattle. And so these women that are dealing with men that are coming up and they are ordering their coffee because they have to wear lingerie, like that's kind of the thing. And so they'd get really good tips, obviously, but then they have to put up with basically seeing a man like masturbating, like who's like pulled up. It's just all this blatant sexual harassment that they just have to kind of put up with. And a lot of them are saying it's damaging how they see men. I mean, it's very damaging to even just interpersonal relationships, and also like men having access to women's bodies in this way is just, we don't like it.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I had situations in the strip clubs where I was, sexually violated, and I actually would get very angry and violent, and I would in self-defense, hit them in the head with my stiletto.
Yeah.
And a number of times the police were called, and the police looked at me like I was crazy for complaining about being sexually violated. The truth is that, you know, sexual harassment is a job requirement for the commercial sex industry. In any workplace, that, you know, would be like, that kind of behavior would be just not tolerated, subject to legal action. But in the commercial sex industry, it's a job requirement, and it's expected that, you know, you have to deal with the violation of sexual boundaries and sexual assault. I was sexually assaulted on so many occasions, but it's like, well, that's the perception, is that's what you signed up for.
Oh, yeah. That's the reality. And I want people to hear that, because it is glamorized and it is marketed, but it's not really shown truthfully. So as we've, you know, like we kind of shared that, you know, with Fierce Freedom, we do try to do that education, prevention, and awareness. But so we're, you know, neither of us is a survivor of trafficking. So as a survivor, and as a survivor leader, what do you wish that other people, maybe who haven't been in the life, could just understand and get about sex trafficking?
Well, it depends on who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
I mean, right. I would say I need to address the fact that, you know, there's a huge push towards full decriminalization of prostitution. And there's even some really mixed up messaging behind it that's trying to indicate that it's actually to protect trafficked people. And it's trying to make work conditions safer for those in prostitution. But the truth is that 84% of people in prostitution are under third-party control. It is a system that is based on oppression, the exploitation of vulnerability, racism, sexism, and it's a system of oppression that exploits the most vulnerable people in our society. It's not a system of empowerment. And there's a very small group of people who are very vocally advocating for full decriminalization, and their voices are loud and very well funded. And I think the general public doesn't understand. They just hear the kind of rhetoric of, it's my body, my choice. I should be able to sell my body if I want to. Who are you to tell me otherwise? The average person who doesn't understand exploitation and trafficking is going to hear that and say, oh yeah, I guess so. I can see that argument and move on with their life, but not really looking into all of the oppression and you know, the violence that's inherent to prostitution, that it really is not a system of empowerment, but it's one that exploits those with the least power. And so I actually did a TEDx talk called The Oldest Oppression in the Book. We actually had to retitle it, Should Prostitution Be Legal? Long story short, it got banned. It was launched by TED and it got banned by TED.
Wow.
For being too political, even though they have those on the same topic that are promoting full decriminalization. But the push to promote full decriminalization is so widespread, and the pockets are so deep that anyone who's opposing that is coming under attack. So at first I experienced terrible cyber attacks, spamdexing, shadow banning, all of that. And when I was fighting with YouTube and with TED and had to get attorneys involved because my video was being completely suppressed, I finally went to take it down and re-upload it with a new title, hoping that would help. And in that process, TED banned it. So we have since launched it on our own website called mybandtedtalk.com, and where you can see the actual video and you can see the story, even down to like screenshots of correspondence I received from TED. But there's a strong push to silence anyone who's saying full decriminalization is a terrible idea. Research that was done on 150 countries looking at exploitation and trafficking found that in places where prostitution was legalized or fully decriminalized, there was an increase in exploitation and trafficking. Full decriminalization is not the model that is going to protect vulnerable people. And so anyways, you can maybe put in the show notes or whatever the link to I relaunched it. I just edited out the TEDx branding.
Yeah.
I relaunched.
I want to watch it. I'm getting
I
a
know.
little.
Yeah.
I need here.
And it was launched through the UCLA TEDx community. So it went through rigorous review and it got fully approved and then banned. So
My goodness. Yeah, we will
Wow.
definitely be linking that in the show notes for sure.
Mhm.
And absolutely. I mean, there are studies, because we get that question a lot too, is, well, what if prostitution was legal? Would this go away? Would trafficking decrease? And the studies always show, either in Nevada legal brothels or in Europe, they're like, because Amsterdam, it's legal. It's one of the main hubs of trafficking that goes on. Think of it this way: it's basically one less hoop for a trafficker to have to go through, where they have absolutely no fear of law enforcement or anything that would prevent them from completely, making so much money and continuing to recruit and abuse and coerce victims. Like, to me, it makes sense, but.
But the other thing is, like, in those places you mentioned, prostitution is legal, which means it's subject to regulation. The criminalization model would remove all regulation.
Wow.
Be like the wild, wild west for traffickers. Like, it's insane.
I think
Pimping and pandering would be decriminalized under full criminalization. You could own a brothel, pimp, be a madam without any criminal repercussion.
Any intervention. And wasn't there, like, in DC, weren't they going to pass this like a couple years ago? I feel like I remember that.
It's yes, and there was a big push against it. And now, but it's popping up like it's like whack-a-mole. Everywhere we go to try to fight full decrim in one place, it's popping up in another place, or even just like, yeah, it's a whole mess. If people want to learn more about it,
Yeah,
and how they get involved. I created an advocacy toolkit for people who want to really get involved in advocating for the equality model, which in my former TEDx talk, banned TEDx talk, I tell people and explain what the equality model is and the different legal models, legal approaches to prostitution. But so if people really want to get involved, we have an advocacy toolkit that we created that they can download for free at that website, mybannedtedtalk.com.
Awesome.
So good.
I think that's great. And I also think it's interesting that people want to silence you, who is literally a survivor of trafficking and exploitation. You're the person that we should be listening to. And I just think that's really
insane.
Such an agenda, such a personal agenda that people would want to silence you. So we're definitely going to post that. So beyond that, where do you think that, somebody who is maybe hearing your story for the first time and wanting to do something? I mean, you mentioned maybe promoting good legislation, right? Like partial decrim or the equality model, but where else could somebody begin if they want to help disrupt a cycle of exploitation within their own sphere?
So we created a digital training. We used to do trainings in person. We created a digital training to make it very accessible for people who want to learn more about best practices for reaching and supporting those who have experienced exploitation and trafficking. So they can find out information at iamatreasure.com about our full training. But if they want to get a taste of the training and see like what kinds of things we're covering, my teaching style, we have a free 1-hour training that maybe you guys would also enjoy. It's called How to Help Someone Who's Stuck. And that can be accessed free download at iamatreasure.com/stuck. So people, and you can put that in the show notes as well.
Okay. Yeah.
The final thing I would say in terms of like, where can people start? If you're like, okay, maybe, I don't know, someone's a stay-at-home mom with all the kids and they just are really involved in all the school drop-offs and the sports and the things. And they're like, I cannot get involved in anti-trafficking, but maybe you could consider being a foster parent and bringing another child into your current life and routine, because 70% I know of in the US of trafficking victims are from the foster care system. And so disrupting the cycle of exploitation often starts with intervening in those who would become very susceptible to it through foster care and being, a part of that.
That's so true. It's such a root issue, And then did you want to ask your question that you had?
Yeah, well, a couple different things that I was just thinking is, when you say that, I've said for years when people have asked, I'd say, gosh, if you could just go to your local Boys and Girls Club and, be a mentor or teach Sunday school or, and lean into it and make eye contact and, just touch the shoulder of the child, something, just be present and build, equity with young people and be the positive person in their life. And it's crazy because a lot of people really want to do this is my experience, would want to be what they would think would be the exciting thing to do in the anti-trafficking and exploitation world of kicking down brothel doors and going in and doing the big rescue. Or, it's crazy when what we need everybody to do is just invest, and be that trusting person that your friend was to you, and show up and be that person. So kind of tied in with that, I'm curious because I'm hearing of, it feels like it's a little bit of a trend right now, at least where we are, where a lot of people just feel, especially in the faith community, really want to be going into strip clubs. And I wonder what your feeling is about that. Like, you guys, and I don't know, I should know this before I ask this question, but I don't know if you have training for people who are going into the clubs. I'm feeling like, kind of protective, of people who feel like this is something that, like maybe they're in over their heads.
Right. Yeah. So I also am protective, which is why we have a whole training track called Outreach and Care that specifically trains people how to start and sustain a healthy, successful strip club outreach or sex industry outreach, including the best practices for that. So for me, it's super important for people to be really equipped and really prepared, and also to have a long-term commitment, because this is not just about checking something off your bucket list. Like I did outreach in a strip club and I went skydiving and bucket list.
Oh my gosh.
It's like it otherwise
about it on your social media.
Yeah.
It's a little voyeuristic, and it feels so definitely it's important, it's needed, and we've seen so many beautiful things come out of the strip club outreach that we do. We started doing strip club outreach almost 20 years ago. That's really how we started, was with strip club outreach. We still to this day reach every single club in Los Angeles and have trained outreaches in 120 cities around the world. But there are some ways you can go about it that are really healthy and helpful and productive. And there's some things you can do that are some pretty big mistakes that we want to hopefully help people avoid. So that's where we're super passionate about training.
So good. So you still offer that training though, if people want you to.
Oh yeah, now it's digital, because we want people to.
Okay, so it's digital.
That's it. Yeah. So same. So we have three tracks. One is for outreach and care. So people who want to start or enhance faith-based outreaches. Have allies and service providers, which is for people who are providing services or are allies to those who are recovering from exploitation and trafficking, but it does not have the outreach piece in it. It's just allies and service providers. And the third track is for faith-based allies and service providers, people of faith who want to learn about all the best practices, learn about how they can support those experiencing exploitation, trafficking, and incorporate their faith in the work that they're doing.
That's great.
That's great. Yeah.
So
you guys, I just want to say, it's just, I'm so grateful for you, Harmony, and for Treasures and the work that you've developed over the last 20 years. And I hope you guys are planning to have a great big celebration for your 20th. I think that's amazing.
I'm like, we have staff meeting later. I'm like, I should talk to them about this.
Yes.
We just celebrated our 10. It was a pretty good 10.
I feel like, people like our organization, like we get to stand on your shoulders. You've done some of the hard work, and you did the groundbreaking for, we actually started in 2007. We didn't really put a name to it. So we've been around for a little bit longer, but you have been, doing the work for a long time. And I celebrate you. Our organization celebrates you. So thankful for the trainings and the really quality trainings with the research that goes behind all of that. And thank you. We're really grateful for you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's an honor.
It's just such it's so many pieces of this like are just so great. And I think any one of us could start at one piece, you know, like you could start by taking that training about strip club outreach. And so Harmony, I know we're kind of, you know, like rounding out our time together, but I would like for you to fill in the blank for this next one. So you, Harmony, blank brings me hope in this movement.
Um, blank brings me hope in this movement. Jesus.
Yep.
But also survivor leaders bring me hope in this movement. And, you know, I am so blessed that I not only get to employ survivor leaders, get to work with survivor leaders, I get to work with survivor leaders that I personally supported and mentored in their process. To meet them on day one and see the incredible women they are, the leaders that they are in their own right, that they've grown to a place where like I call them for advice. And I mean, that gives me so much hope, and their relentless passion to pour into others and to give back and to see other women find freedom is just like, it's inspiring. And that's what gives me hope, because I'm like, wow,
Very cool.
this is something good's happening here. Something right is happening here.
That must just feel amazing to to know where they were at. And so, you know, and then see the growth that's happened. So then also, you know, what would you say to somebody that maybe is at the beginning of this healing journey, and maybe they listen to this podcast and they think that's me, you know, I'm being exploited, whether it's on OnlyFans, whether it's, you know, in person at a strip club. What would you say to someone who maybe is in that similar situation that you've seen or that you were in? What would you say to that person?
I mean, the first thing is like, you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to do, and don't, because you need support. And I would encourage that person to reach out and find people to support you in your process. Whether it is an organization like Treasures or local organizations that are there. Thankfully, now there are a lot more resources and support. So take advantage of them, reach out, get the support, and know that your current exploitation, your current situation, your past situation does not have to determine your future. And it's just never too late for a fresh start or a new beginning. And there's always hope. As long as there is breath in your lungs, there is always, always hope.
So good. So as you know, as we're wrapping up together, again, I just want to say thank you to Harmony for just all the work you've done. You know, we've resourced your videos before, especially I think the one about Maslow's hierarchy, use that one all the time. And you're just doing such incredible work, and you're trailblazing for other people to utilize those resources and do this work well. So, you know, again, we mentioned 20 years of doing this officially. So what do you think is next for you?
Well, I'm creating a recovery curriculum. I have it there on my whiteboard. I'm super excited about it. We did a recovery curriculum a long time ago called X Girls. The videos are still on YouTube and still getting watched. And but there's been a desire and a request for a part 2 to dig in a little bit deeper. And of course, I've learned a lot in the past 10 years. So want to just, I'm excited to launch that. It's going to be a 4-part curriculum that really is based on the needs of a person in various stages of their recovery process. So I'm digging my heels into that. And we just purchased a home in the San Fernando Valley to run our programs out of. And so we're really establishing this as and like re-envisioning all of our programs, and everything kind of has shifted since COVID. So now we're doing virtual, and we didn't do that before. So it's a big, fun, exciting season of a lot of transition, and I'm excited to see what's next.
That's great. And you have probably seen this really grow. I mean, I think I saw a picture on Instagram. There were so many people that are part of Treasures as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we have a great volunteer team. Our staff is small. We need more staff, but we have a wonderful volunteer team. Yeah.
It's great.
Definitely grown.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has just been awesome. And I think that there's something here for anyone that's maybe trapped in a life of exploitation and thinks there's no hope. As you said, there always is hope. And for those of us who, want to help, there, again, like you said, I think that's just so powerful how we live our own lives and how we, if we're able to see our own worth and value, that's going to trickle into those other relationships too. And just being faithful in what God has put before you. And if it's just having a conversation, if it's giving someone a meal and sitting down with them, just be faithful in that. Be faithful in what He's put in your hands.
100%. Yep. Never gets bigger than the one.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Oh my gosh.